What I'd like to share with you are some of the things that I've learned over the course of 10 years of myth busting that are applicable to problem solving, because that's essentially what we do every day. We make things that no one has made, few people have thought of, and along the way we solve dozens and dozens of problems. But first, let's talk a little bit about innovation. Innovation starts with creativity. For me, innovation started with Lego. This set number 357, the Legoland Fire Station, 1973, was my first Lego set. And I don't know if at the time my parents realized what they were starting with Lego. They probably just thought it was a block set, he would like it, whatever. But as it turns out, Lego is an amazing tool for innovation. Play stimulates creativity. Using what you have to make what you don't have. For example, in those days, right, let's go back, the blocks were just blocks. You didn't have all these fancy, nowadays, Lego's a little different, right? With all the licenses, there were all these kind of cool curved pieces, but back in the day, block was a block. They came in a couple different sizes, but essentially they are all blocks. So you had to get a little bit more creative about how you were putting your blocks together. This is engineering at its core. It's a modular design. Lego is a system. The blocks fit together in a certain way. What makes it a great design tool, much like software, is that it's easily reconfigurable. If you're machining a part and you make a mistake, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be making a new part from scratch. With Lego, you take the block off, you try something new. It's very quick. It's very easy to reconfigure. It's very easy to try out a prototype, and then you move on from there. Not unlike the Matrix. There are rules. Some can be bent, others can be broken. Now, in the context of Mythbusters, our motto, failure is always an option. It was printed on all of our t-shirts, all of our hats. Failure is always an option. And prior to working on Mythbusters, I was afraid of failure. It took 10 years for me to begin to accept the idea of failure, because the real motto should be, failure is always a design tool. Get used to the idea of failing at something, because you learn from each failure. If you never fail, you never learn. In the case of the JATO rocket car, this myth was about an Impala that a guy had taken several JATO rockets, strapped them to the Impala, as the myth goes, fired it off, and they find the smoking hulk of a car embedded into the side of a mountain about a mile away. In order to execute this in real life, we actually tried this 3 times. First time was on a dry lake bed using hobby-grade rockets. We couldn't get our hands on a real jet-assisted takeoff rocket. For some reason, they just don't like giving those out. So, in the first iteration, which was not a failure per se, but it didn't exactly cause takeoff. We had these hobby-grade rockets. Since then, we stepped up our rockets. The final experiment had 6 of them in a row. We put them in the center of gravity. In the original experiment, we tried them on the roof, and that ended up pushing the front down. So, in order to get flight, we put them right in the center line. along the center axis. We took out the engine and addressed the weight balance of the car. Again, the second attempt failed because of a triggering problem, but we figured for this one, we would address the weight. We built a giant ramp out in the middle of the desert because in the myth, the guy, I think, hit a bump or something, and that's what caused him to take off. So, all right, no more fooling around, built a giant ramp. And in the end, we did manage to get flight. Unfortunately, it wasn't that long. Which leads us to one other point, which is very important, which is understanding the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation with the JATO rocket car is that an arrow, a missile, a jet fighter, they all have a number of things in common. And one of the major things that they have in common is that they are not shaped like an Impala. The reality of this situation is that without significant modification, this Impala is never going to fly. There are dozens of ways to do any given task. For example, the coffin puncher. This came from a myth from Kill Bill, where Uma Thurman, who is playing a character called the Bride, is buried alive, and she has to punch her way out of a coffin, just with a few inches of punch at a time. In order to test this, we required a machine, which I designed and built, to continuously punch the lid of a coffin for hours and hours, like 8 to 10 hours nonstop. There are a number of ways I could have done this. I could have used a crank. This particular way used an air piston, a cylinder inside of there with its own air tank and a bunch of timers. For vector vengeance, it was all about kicking a soccer ball or accelerating a soccer ball very, very quickly. And in this one, I had 3 different machines that I built to do the same job. By the way, I can actually kick a soccer ball at close to the speed of sound. I know, it's a lot. All this to say that your way, or the way that you are thinking of, may not be the best or most efficient way. And so the idea of compromise has to come into play, particularly when you are working on a team or in a small group that requires collaboration. Your way may not be the best way, so be open to other ideas. I think one of the most significant things that we came across working on Mythbusters was this idea of changing the reference plane. Now, for a reference plane, most of us have a single reference plane that we live in. We get up in the morning, we put on our clothes, have breakfast, drive to work. And it's fairly linear. And it's the one that we are used to looking at. But you see, in physics, what you can do is essentially take the camera off of yourself, off of your personal reference plane, and change it to another perspective. For example, this is a myth called hotel parachute. Not saying that you will have to escape this hotel, but if you did, what would you use that is available to you? Let's say that there was, a fire and you had to escape from your hotel room by jumping from the balcony, which I do not recommend. I'm just saying hypothetically. What could you use that was in your hotel room? And so we set about to test different materials. Obviously, linens, but also shower curtains, duvet covers, things like that, that we could adapt. The only problem was that we didn't have a space big enough in our shop to continually test these materials one after the other. So instead of throwing the thing out and using the parachute to go down through the air, we said, why don't we fire the air up and into the parachute? So you can see here, Tori is actually standing, not the safest thing in the world, but he's standing on top of a fan. So we're looking at this not from the reference plane of on the ground observing, but from the reference plane of the parachute itself, having the air accelerated past it. Similarly, for another myth called snowplow split, where a guy drove his car directly into a giant snowplow at very high speed and apparently split it all the way down the middle, we couldn't accelerate our car to incredible speed. We tried this in real life, by the way, and it did work pretty well, as a matter of fact. But we wanted to split all the way through. The myth was that he split his car in half. So we want to split all the way through the engine block, through the seats, through everything, all the way, two halves of car. That's what everybody's picturing. In order to do this, we had to accelerate to 400 miles an hour. Now, on our show, we had access to a place called New Mexico Tech that will give you, I don't think you can actually get a PhD, you can get at least a master's degree in blowing things up. They have a rocket sled track at their facility. But the thing is, this was about a car going very, very fast into a snowplow that was stationary. They said, no, actually you can't accelerate the car down the track at 400 miles an hour. It will never hold up. It'll just break off. So we changed the reference plane. And instead of accelerating the car, we accelerated the plow, which is what this is. And another rocket sled experiment that we did. Okay, look, it's just a thinly veiled excuse to do cool stuff. I'm not going to lie. Also, we teach science. But whenever we are able to use a rocket sled, we will. In this case, it was about a car being sandwiched between two semi-trucks, a small car. And again, we could not accelerate the car into this wall, this plane-type surface, so we accelerated the wall. And in fact, I have video of this. Let's roll it right now, and you can see what happens. The car disintegrates. It's pretty damn impressive. And you see that little thing that comes after? That's the booster rocket pack. So, okay, there you go. Now, another thing that we specialize in, as I mentioned, is having situations where the tools that are available to you are not exactly what you need. So in our case, we will take an existing tool and adapt it to something else, some new way to do it. For example, if you are apparently a Ghostbuster and you need to guide a giant stream of electricity at a ghost, use a Tesla coil and a super soaker. This is a shock watch sticker. What we needed was a cheap and easy way to measure impacts. On a show like ours, we actually had a crash test dummy, and that crash test dummy was a member of the cast. He had a name, his name was Buster. And in order to measure the impacts on Buster, we had these stickers, which are made for shipping things across the country, and you want to see if your computer system somehow got damaged by being dropped. How you would normally do this, now, a tool for this did exist, but a Thor 2 dummy is like $10,000 to $20,000, and that's not the kind of budget that we had on our show. So we had to get creative. In order to measure punch force during one of our myths, we didn't really have a punch force sensor, and so the sensors that I'm holding there, the green things, those are a matrix-type force sensor that just happened to be appropriate. So we taped it to a punching bag, because sometimes you have to get creative. For measuring pressure waves underwater, what Jamie is holding there, the green circle with the silver dome in the middle, that's a diaphragm. That's a calibrated sensor. And we came up with a technique where we had a pipe. This is underwater, so a lot of normal sensors might not work. We had a pipe, and the pipe had one of these on either side. It's a diaphragm, a very thin metallic diaphragm. And once you exceed the calibrated load on the diaphragm, it punches through, indicating, it's a way of indicating make or break. A technique, and you'll see the thing that Adam is holding on the right, that's the pipe. It's a technique that then went into a scientific paper and ended up being a technique that has been used quite a bit since then. What derails your creative process? What derails your development process? We do. We do. Our ego at believing that my way is the right way, the only way. Stubbornness, not willing to listen to other ideas, or not willing to change your reference plane and change the way that you are looking at the problem to try and find another solution. Bring up Adam and Jamie. There's a famous story that you probably have heard if you're a fan of the show, and it goes that Adam and Jamie hate each other. That's not true. They don't hate each other. What is true is that what they said was, we don't hang out after work together. The thing that's significant about that is that they have two very different ways of looking at the world. Jamie is kind of a brute force. He grew up on a farm. He is a brute force engineer. When I first met Jamie, by way of example, we were fighting robots together in robot wars. I was on a team for ILM. His robot was called Blendo. Jamie's idea of engineering, of making a fighting robot, was to take a 3-horsepower lawnmower engine, attach that to a giant cooking wok turned upside down, and then put steel blades along the bottom and have it rotate at several hundred RPM, such that anything that touched it would literally explode. Adam's kind of engineering is very iterative. He tries different things at a rapid pace. And if you've ever worked with him, you know where he's been, because there's just a mess that follows him all around the shop. One of their greatest strengths is that they do have these different ways of approaching a problem, two very different viewpoints. But in that way, they are able to come together, work out between them, why is your viewpoint better? Why is mine better? What parts can we put together? Because the ultimate goal is testing the myth, or in your case, coming up with a product. So, That's pretty much it. That's all of the tips that I have for you in the 10 years that we have learned, but they are valuable ones. Now, unfortunately, Mythbusters is over. It's been 14 seasons of blowing things up and having a good time teaching science. So, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Microsoft. Thank you, Xamarin. Thank you, all of our sponsors.